Hello everyone, my name is Adu and this is Ready Go Expat. In today's video, Leo Gomez will be talking about living in Canada, the challenges he had when he moved there, the cost of living, what is life there like in Toronto. So this is actually an episode of my podcast called Expats Exposed. So if you haven't checked the podcast yet, I'll leave the links here below. You can listen to it in all major platforms, podcast platforms like Spotify, Google Podcasts, Apple Podcasts, Anchor, and so on. So if you want to listen to these longer talks, make sure to check out the podcast. Ready? Go.
Hey, Adu. Good to be here, man. Good to be here. First time on your podcast. I'm excited.
Yeah, this is the third time I'm doing this, so I still have no idea what I'm doing, but I know you are super experienced. Can you tell us first about your podcast?
Yes, for the past 2 years now, I have been producing, I would say, successful in our own terms, podcast. It's called the Teacher Talking Time podcast, and basically what we do is it's an interview-based podcast where we have researchers, we have experts in the field of applied linguistics or any other area related to English language teaching or foreign language learning, and we basically host them on the podcast. And we just ask them lots of questions. We're just really, really curious about what is happening in academia. And we try to bridge this gap between what is happening in research and how this can actually be applied to the classroom.
Yeah, guys, you have to check his podcast as well. You can find all the information in the notes below. So Leo, to start, I want to ask you to briefly introduce yourself and mention how you got from Brazil to Canada.
Oof. How long is this podcast supposed to be for? Like a day? Are we recording here for 36 hours? This is going to be almost like the Forrest Gump version of the podcast, of the story. My background, I don't know where to start, but I'll try to summarize it by saying that I was originally born and bred in Brazil. It always had this itch to really explore, to really venture, or to look for different ways of exploring and getting to know myself a little more, but while being inserted in a different culture. And I've lived in different countries, but Canada has been home since 2005. I can't believe it. It's been over 15 years now. Wow. So I've basically moved here in my early 20s, right after university. I had a short stint in the United States, and then I eventually decided to move to Canada, and I've immigrated. I've become a Canadian citizen, and I have very strong roots here because my kids were born here. So I am somewhat attached to this place.
Nice, man. That's like, how old are your kids?
My daughter is 12 and my son is 10. So my daughter was born 3 years after I moved here, which is crazy if you think about it.
It is.
I was
crazy.
I don't remember. So 2008 she was born. So I had moved here in 2005. So yeah, wow. Yeah, you're right. So yeah, I'm no longer married though. The kids stayed. The marriage was dissolved.
Okay, life happened. Okay.
Yeah.
But what about like why Canada? Because have you were thinking about Canada before moving there, or was it something like I'll just go abroad and see what happens?
It's a good question. It kind of happened, but it didn't. Prior to moving to Canada, I had spent about a year in the United States. It's a long story, but I'll try to shorten it up by saying that I was hired by an educational company to basically sell books door to door. I eventually accepted. I got the job. I didn't sell a single book, but I quit the job and I eventually started working in McDonald's, and then I started doing a master's at a university in Philadelphia. It's a long story, but eventually I came to the realization that the United States was just not for me. I've always wanted to try something different. And prior to my trip to the United States, I had met a Canadian woman with whom I had fallen in love. And I said, well, maybe I should explore Canada. But eventually I went to the United States. But I've always had Canada at the back of my mind. So I've always had Canada as like a second option. And as I said to you, I've always been an adventurer at heart, and I truly believe that living abroad has a lot more benefits than drawbacks. And eventually I said, you know what? I went back to Brazil after my stint in the United States, and I said to myself, you know what? I don't want to be here. So I just packed up my bags and I moved to Canada, and I had like $200 in my pocket.
Wow, man, that's insane. And I can imagine like all the challenges you've had at the beginning because getting somewhere where you don't know many people and you're not in the jobs market, like finding the first job and getting to know
Mhm.
people. How what were your challenges when you arrived in Canada?
I mean, before you think about the challenges, I think it's important for us to kind of go back and think about the opportunities, because as I said, I think living abroad is a struggle. I think like any sort of change that we go through in life, we will have short-term pain. But I truly believe that short-term pain always yields long-term gains. And for me, um, it has been, professional development. When you move to a foreign culture, you are provided with different training, different working experiences, and that those things really give you an opportunity to expand your horizons and your range of expertise. And as you know this, because you've lived in China, it's very useful for your long-term career development. Not to mention the fact that you also gain a lot of insights into another culture. You understand a lot of nuances behind a certain culture, and you begin to understand the significance to the people who are from that culture. And I think we're going to talk more about this in the show. And I think another important benefit, which I will bring back to the challenges in a second, is that you really develop this global mindset. And I think a lot of companies, a lot of employers, a lot of firms are always on the lookout for people who can actually think on a global scale. And people like you and I, and people who have experienced different cultures, they are able to carry out and market themselves professionally from a completely different perspective. And again, for me, that was like being hired as a school director allowed me to actually do that and helped me to think more outside the box. And of course, Edwin, we all know this, the experience that we get abroad really adds to our personal growth. And that's something that is not to be underestimated, because living abroad will, and I think we're going to talk about this later, but living abroad will definitely affect your identity, and you will grow as a person, of course, but a lot of the perspectives, a lot of the values that you inherited from your hometown will be upgraded with a more holistic perspective that allows you to encompass different viewpoints. So you're challenging your comfort zone physically, you're challenging your comfort zone mentally, you're challenging your comfort zone professionally, emotionally. But as you know, it will be, if you decide to do this eventually, it will be a transformative experience as you begin to overcome all the challenges and come to terms with the fact that these challenges will help you realize your potential, and that you can actually do a lot more than you thought of. But to go back to your question, I think this was a very long answer. But I think the challenge for anyone would always be the language, because I mean, you lived in China, so trying to get a job, trying to make friends, try to complete the most basic tasks like buying food or filling out forms can be a very frustrating thing and stressful if you're not fluent in one of the two languages. In Canada, I was very lucky that the language was English, so I was already fully fluent in the language when I moved here. So I didn't really have many big challenges here. I think the biggest challenge was definitely my relationship, my marriage.
I see. I see. It's you said a lot of interesting things uh, because you mentioned like a global mindset, and
Mm,
sometimes people try to put like categorize or put labels into everything.
mm,
And if you just stop and think, like if you introduce yourself today, and if I introduce myself today, and we say we're from Brazil, or you can say you're from Canada, still being from Canada is not the same as someone who is from Canada and has never lived abroad. As you said, it
right.
changes your identity. So when
Hmm.
when they see me, oh, you're from Brazil, I'm like, well, yeah, but I've lived, 5 years abroad and in a country which is totally different. And it's not only, I'm sure you haven't only learned about Canadian culture, you have learned a lot about so many other cultures, so many other, countries and people and accents and languages. So it's definitely true. Like, it changes your identity. So I don't like to call myself, only if label is a thing, Brazilian, but like more as you said, like a global citizen, because I do have a global mindset, so
Yeah.
totally, man. And yeah, the language is an issue. Great that you knew English. I didn't know Chinese. It was my biggest
I was going
issue.
to ask you that. Like,
Yeah.
for you, that was probably the biggest challenge,
It
right?
was definitely my biggest challenge, because when you get there and you cannot speak the language, even though you have apps, but it's not the same when you cannot do, like, just basic things like going to the supermarket and trying to get the right piece of meat. Like, I couldn't explain what I wanted exactly. But it helps that the Chinese people are usually extremely friendly, extremely welcoming, and when they see a foreign face, they want to do their best to help you. They know that foreigners probably don't know the language. They know that, so they try to help. And the next question is about, I want to know about, like, what surprised you the most when you got there in Toronto? Because, for example, for us, I've never been to Canada. The plan was to go this year, but
Well, there are no plans for this year. No, let's not plan anything for this year.
And I was so happy because Canada actually changed the rules for, like, the visa. Because as a Brazilian citizen, I need to get, in the past, I needed to get, like, a visa, specific visa for Canada, apply through the embassy, whatever. Now, because I already have a 10-year American visa, as a tourist, I can do the whole process online, and it's easier. So I was like, I'm definitely going to Canada now. It's so easy now to get a visa and stuff. But then, 2020. And then, but what surprised you the most about Canada? Because just so people know, you sent me a picture today of a car outside and just snow everywhere. I mean, today is November 22nd. Like, tell us about.
It's been snowing all day.
Wow.
It's been snowing all day. I haven't left the house today. I think what surprised me the most about living in Toronto, definitely the weather. Even though you know that it's cold, but I don't think you know how cold it. Actually, I'm going to say something positive and something negative. I think the negative, which is kind of going to link to the question when we talk about the pros and cons, but I think the weather, for sure, because Canada is extremely warm, humid in the summer. So you wouldn't have guessed, I wouldn't have guessed back in the day when I first moved, that it was going to be so warm in the summer. It's like sweaty, humid kind of temperature. And it's just like some days are unbearable. And during the summer, this is the best part, is that it's pretty clear out at like 9 p.m. So you're still out at 9 p.m. and it's like you can still see the sun out. And that's the beautiful thing about the summer. Having said that, the winter, the days are much shorter. And like, for example, today at 4 o'clock, it was dark already. So, yeah, so in the winter, the days are much shorter. So all that crap that we learn in geography, like in the summer, the days are longer. In the winter, the days are shorter. Yes, that only happens in countries like Canada. Not so much in Brazil. We know that it's always the day starts at a certain time and it ends at a certain time. But here, you can actually experience that. And I think the weather is definitely something that you don't expect to be something that surprises you, because you know it's cold, but you never know how cold it is until you fully experience the Canadian winter. And I think the positive thing would be how multicultural it is. I mean, people think, oh yeah, Canada is a country made up of immigrants and this and that, but you don't realize how multicultural it is until you actually live here. Because honestly, we have these small towns, like we have Chinatown, we have Greek town, we have Little Italy. So it's always little plus country or country plus town. So we have Greek town, Chinatown, Little Italy, Little Greece, and so on and so forth. So in those places, you have a lot of those traditional cultures because a lot of the immigrants live in those neighborhoods. So something that I actually learned recently, and I didn't know this, but multiculturalism was actually officially adopted by the government in the 70s and the 80s. And I didn't know that because they adopted that as almost like an ideology, because there was so much emphasis back in the day on the importance of immigration, that I think this idea, this policy of multiculturalism has become almost like a logo here in Canada.
Interesting. Yeah, I had no idea about that. But when you say about the different um, people there and stuff, like I know that there is a large, of course, Chinese community because a lot of my students go there and they mention that. I know there are a lot of Portuguese. Is that right?
Yes, yes, big Portuguese community here. Lots of Italians. There's an entire Jewish Russian area here. There's an entire neighborhood that is only Ukrainians. So you have basically very very communities that are based on the nationality, based on a country. So you would go to an area that is like all the Jewish people live here, all the Russian people live here, and it's funny because it's an entire neighborhood. So people, I think when people move here, they deliberately choose to live in those areas where their community is inserted.
Yeah, and
Because yeah.
no, yeah, and I can just imagine like what the food is like because if you have all these countries, like the restaurants there must be like authentic food,
Mm-hmm.
like from
Mm-hmm.
from these countries. So you mentioned about Canada being welcoming to immigrants, and that's the image that at least I have. Like, and I mean, I think most people have because you have like there is a ranking score, a scoring system for like immigrants and stuff. So,
Mm-hmm.
do you feel this welcoming feeling there that like even though you are, anyone who is from, anywhere, any country in the world, they're welcoming Canada and they are supposed to feel Canadian as well?
I think so. I would say that the country does a very good job of encouraging people to really integrate into the communities, and they do this in many different ways. Um, if you are an immigrant, you have services only dedicated to immigrants. They have, even when you decide to become when you become Canadian, when you apply for Canadian citizenship and you win, and you win, you don't win, it's not a lottery, but you get your citizenship. They give you this package where for an entire year you have access to everything that is related to Canadian culture, museums. So they give you a free pass for a year for you to explore the country, which I found fascinating. And of course, I didn't use the pass because I'm always working. So I never used the pass. Maybe I used it once. Maybe I went to the CN Tower for the first time, because living in Toronto, you don't really think about going to these places because it's like you living in Recife and not visiting some of the tourist attractions because you live there. And we kind of take that for granted. But I think, to answer your question, I think the country does a very good job in terms of welcoming immigrants. I think the local communities often provide the kind of support that new immigrants need. I think the biggest challenge for new immigrants is the integration within the workforce, because that's where some of the challenges come into play. The language, knowledge of intercultural communication, and the way people relate to each other here can be quite different. But I think overall, I think it's safe to say that everyone feels welcome here.
Nice. And you're talking, everything that you're talking about now is about Toronto, right? Just to make this
Hmm.
clear. Okay, so let's talk about cost of living in Toronto. And
Hmm.
if you want to compare maybe to like what are, I don't know, cheap, because I'm just imagining that Toronto is perhaps one of the most expensive cities there. But then you could also compare it to like maybe other Canadian cities,
Yeah.
you know?
Well, yeah, I think Toronto, Vancouver, and Montreal are by far the most expensive cities to live in, because they are the number one destination for most immigrants. The cost of living in Canada, as you said, I think it really varies from city to city. For example, I'm working for a university in Nova Scotia. The cost of living in Nova Scotia is about $1,300 cheaper than living in Toronto, which is interesting. So if you think about the national average cost of living for a single person in Canada, we're looking at, from what I remember, and I read this a long time ago, but it was approximately $2,700 per month. Okay.
Wow, that's a
If you,
lot.
of course, if you are a family, if you have like two kids, then we're looking at, I don't know, $5,300. Um, like basically for you, if you are a single person, you need to make a minimum of $50,000 before taxes if you want to live alone in Toronto. Because Toronto, as I said to you, Toronto is great because there's so many things to do. The city is, it's very much like São Paulo. It's very much like Paris. It has a lot of things. There's a lot to do in terms of food, art, music, you name it. But it's very expensive. Rent is expensive. If you want to get a fitness membership, you're going to pay a lot of money. Eating out, dining out is extremely expensive. If you eat out 3 times a week, I'm telling you, your money is not gonna last. Of course, you want to go out, you're gonna go to the movies. Of course, people here drink a lot of takeaway coffee, so your Starbucks bill. I remember I used to drink a lot of coffee outside, and I stopped. I was spending on average about almost $200 in coffee.
Wow, just in coffee.
Just in coffee, yeah, yeah. But again, we're talking about Toronto, aka the highest standard of living in Canada. But if you decide to move to smaller cities within the what we call the GTA or the Greater Toronto Area, then we're looking at a cheaper cost of living. But again, most people when they travel, myself included, when we move abroad, we want to be in the big cities so we can actually experience the metropolis. But again, as you know, and we've talked about this before, you get tired. I think it comes at a price, and you eventually start getting tired of living in one of the big cities.
I see. Yeah. I always had this picture of like Toronto being, as you said, like multicultural and stuff, but I had no idea it was that expensive. I mean, at least I'm comparing it to like, it's because I yesterday I interviewed two friends who live in Seattle.
Okay.
And it's kind of like the same. I mean, it's expensive.
Seattle's expensive, yeah.
Yeah. So wow, that's
It's a big
interesting.
city, yeah.
Yeah, and these are two friends who have also lived. One has lived in LA, and the other has lived in New York. So they're saying no, it's not as expensive as New York and LA, but it's still very expensive in the US.
Yeah.
Like,
I think
US.
any big city that you live in the US or Canada, I think it's going to be expensive. If you live in any of those big cities, you know this. If you live in London, if you live in Paris, if you live in what do you call it in the Netherlands? What do you call it? Amsterdam. Yeah. If you live in Bangkok, if you live in like Shanghai, it's always going to be more expensive because everyone wants to live there.
Definitely, yes. All right, so you talked about being living there, being Canadian. You're a Canadian citizen, but then let's talk a bit about this thing of like where you're from. That people ask. I'm sure you get asked that a lot. So let's talk first about Brazil. Like,
Okay.
Is Brazil still home for you? And even like there in Canada, what do you miss about the country?
This question of cultural identity is a really tricky one, because when we think about cultural identity, when I think about it, it's always the identity of belonging to a group, and this group can be related to nationality. This group can be related to ethnicity. It can be related to religion, to our social class, to our professional class, teachers. And each group has their own distinct culture. So for me, Brazil is not home in terms of like being a place for me to live. It's not my home anymore. It's stopped being home a long time ago. I think if we were thinking about family, yes, I still have family in Brazil, so that I still have that homey feeling attached to family. But like in terms of culture, a lot of the traditions, a lot of the things that Brazilians identify themselves with, I would say that I don't think I think I'm the worst example of a Brazilian, because I don't like samba. I don't like a lot of things. I'm completely against certain mindsets that Brazilians have. And of course, we can't generalize and say that all Brazilians think a certain way. But there are a lot of things about Brazil that I don't identify myself with. And that's why I decided to leave.
See, and I mean, of course, we talk about that a lot. I can relate to that. It's tough, that I'm back here now. I mean, I was gonna spend 2 weeks. I've ended up.
Right.
It's been 10 months now because of the pandemic
And counting.
and counting. But I I definitely like when I came back. Like I definitely did the things that I really love doing in the country, and I'm sure that you miss those things as
Oh
well.
yeah.
But what are like what do you miss about living in Brazil?
I think I miss, even as we were doing this interview, I miss this level of camaraderie that Brazilians have with each other. You really feel comfortable around each other very easily. Like you just met a person and you are instantly, you have this level of warmth as I said, of camaraderie. It's much easier to strike up friendships in Brazil. It's better to flirt. Everyone is just more, it's more, I don't know, it's just really hard to put that into words. I also miss, I miss the food, not the rice and the beans, but I do miss the steak. I miss, just breathing the air in Brazil. But like I said to you, I haven't really gone back much. But I think to answer your question by answering this other question is that Brazil is not home for me, but it's still part of my identity somehow. I still act in certain ways because of my upbringing in Brazil. And yeah, I think I miss the weather. That's in the beaches, the nice beaches too. That's something that we don't have here. We don't have nice weather. We don't have nice beaches, but we have other things, right? We have, like, it's this whole idea of pros and cons, right? Anyway.
Yeah, and just as a side note, like Brazil is huge as well. I mean, I know it's what I think the fourth largest country or fifth.
Mhm.
But Leo and I are both from the same region. We're in the Northeast, so we're close to the equator. That's why summer and winter, it's like it doesn't make much difference. But then, of course, if you're in the southern states, yes, you have like longer days in the summer and stuff. But also, I think Leo, for us, being from the Northeast, we're so chilled. Like the people here
Yes.
are so, yeah, let's like it's a football match, let's celebrate. It's New Year's, let's celebrate. It's Carnival. Gosh.
The level of hospitality in the Northeast is not something that can be found. Maybe it could be found maybe in other countries. I don't know which ones. But like, I think we were talking about this the other day. It's like, hey, I'm coming over. Oh, I have some friends. They're like, oh, don't worry, we'll find some mattresses. People can sleep on the sofa. Somebody can sleep here. Somebody can sleep there. We don't have this here. People would get a hotel and sleep far away from you.
Oh yeah, okay.
Yeah, like there's this level of respect. Like, oh no, I'm not gonna sleep at your house because, oh, but we're friends. Come on, man, crash on the sofa. This doesn't exist here.
Really, that's
Yeah.
interesting. That's
So
interesting. Yeah,
that's something that I miss.
yeah. I go to Europe, visit my friends. My friends from Brazil who have moved to Europe, and that's exactly what I do. I just sleep on the couch, or if there's an extra room, I'll just sleep there, an extra bed. But it's no big deal. It's like, okay, you're
Yeah.
in my house. If you wake up earlier, do whatever you want, eat whatever
Yeah.
you want, and because yeah, that's an interesting thing. And what about now? Of course, being Canadian, like
Hmm.
this. Was there a day or was there a milestone when you felt Canadian?
Oh, I was thinking about that. It's a really difficult question. I don't really know, to be very honest with you, because I never really thought about this. But I think there were definitely behavioral mindset shifts throughout a period of time, or throughout, yeah, I would say maybe the first 5 years there were many different, I would say, transformative experiences that I'm like, this actually brought me closer to the culture. This actually made me feel more Canadian. I think you never forget your first real snowstorm when it's like minus 45 outside and the power goes out and you still have to go to work. I feel like that's an example of you.
Insane. That's insane.
That's it. That's one example. Or when you go skiing in the winter, it was like you go up a hill and it's like minus 40 degrees and my beard is completely frozen, you know? Like there were these moments where I felt like, wow. I think people are really, it's really hard to say what it feels like to be Canadian because as I said, we're going back to the first question, is like it's really hard for me to have one identity. I think there are certain things about about the Canadian lifestyle, about the Canadian mindset that I have incorporated, just like there are things that I've incorporated from other cultures. I don't necessarily feel a sense of national identity, but I also feel like I am able to belong to very particular social groups. And I think belonging to these groups and understanding the culture of that group, I think that also helped me feel more Canadian. I hope I answered your question.
You did, because it's not like I think it's just impossible to say, oh yeah, there was this day when I got a piece of
Hmm.
paper, document, a stamp, whatever.
Yeah,
No, it's the whole process, as you said. It's
yeah.
like experiencing these things for the first time, and it's so different from our reality in Brazil, of
Like
course.
buying a car, like moving. I mean, I moved a lot, so that definitely didn't really help. But working for a Canadian university, getting a car, having kids, going to teacher and parent meetings, these little, as you said, it's more of a process rather than one day where you get the certificate saying you are a Canadian, because you got a diploma, right? You are a Canadian citizen. I'm like, yay. um but like that wasn't the day, that was just the grade in the whole learning process, right?
Yeah, definitely, man. So it's not like a green card in the US, right?
Right, right.
Okay, yeah.
Yeah, because like if you think about it, it's not like you move here and then you immediately become Canadian. Just like if you move to Sao Paulo and you live there for a year, you can't call yourself Paulista because you've been there for a year. No, there are certain things about the culture that because when you think about culture, always think about acculturation. So acculturation is a process, is not a product. So acculturation has many different steps involved. And I think as you go through these steps, your identity starts to change and you start to relate more to the culture that you are inserted in, as opposed to. But then Edu, what happens is, I think you will understand this perhaps when you move to your next when you move on your next endeavor. We don't know where you're going next. I mean, we do, but we don't. So everyone, we can't tell anyone where you're going. But I think you will get to a point where you're gonna have many different identities. Like you belong to so many places, but you don't belong anywhere. You know what I'm
Same,
saying?
yeah. Yeah, yes, definitely. I was talking to a friend, Tati, and she was telling me, because she has lived in Argentina, in the UK, in different cities within Brazil, and now she's in China. And she says that she still drinks her British tea. She still eats the media luna, which is like the Argentinian
Mm-hmm.
croissant. And she still likes, some Brazilian sweets and stuff like that, that she still, some habits of like eating,
Yes.
couscous in the morning. Like that's
Yes.
very Northeastern, like,
Yeah.
so that's it. Like she is not like, how can you, label that? How can you
Mm-hmm.
just put that in a box? It's impossible.
Yeah, you can't say she's British. You can't say she's Brazilian. You can't say she's Argentinian. She is basically an amalgamation of all these different cultures that she collected. And this is the problem. When you live in so many different places, it's very difficult for you to have uh, a very perhaps unidirectional identity. You become very multi-directional, multicultural. Perhaps that's the best word, I guess.
Yeah, yeah, definitely. Great. Now this year, as I already mentioned, has been, I mean, for me, has been tough, but for the whole world, it's been difficult. Like I have friends from China and from Europe and South America and, you know, the US, Canada, and it's been a tough year for everyone. But
Hmm.
let's try to be positive. And can you try to think of something positive that you gain, or something good that you've learned during this period, the pandemic?
Oh man, I think the pandemic has been the best teacher I've ever had. I've learned so many lessons. I'm not gonna lecture you on all my lessons, but I will focus on one, which is about enduring suffering and hardship. Because if you want to move abroad, if you want to live abroad, if you want to immigrate to another country, I think you will have to learn to suffer and you will have to learn to deal with hardships. Um, So I think one of the most important lessons I've learned is that most things in the world out there are completely outside of our control. And knowing that, internalizing that, really gives you a little bit of internal peace. And then once you gain that peace, you can kind of like start focusing on those things that are within your control. So yeah, I think we can't control the circumstances. We can't control that coronavirus hit us back in the beginning of 2020. We cannot control the restrictions, all the lockdowns being placed on our lives during this pandemic. We cannot control the financial crisis that many people are going through. But we can always control how we react to these things. We can always control how we interact with those people close to us, those who are dealing with those hardships. We can always, lend a hand. We can always try to reconnect with people that we've lost touch with. And you can always learn what to do or what you could do within these new boundaries that we have been placed in. So it's very important that when we find ourselves being led astray or when we find ourselves feeling like we're lost, we just have to return to ourselves and kind of ask ourselves, how can I help? What can I learn? And I think that has been by far one of the most important lessons for me, because a lot of the things that have happened have severely, to a certain extent, affected me. But at the same time, I know that there are people out there that have been largely affected, even more so than I have. So thinking to myself, how can I help these people? What can I learn from these situations? I think it's by far one of the most important lessons I've learned.
True. Yeah, we have to think about that, because I think this pandemic has showed us that yes, we are all connected. Like, it's not like, oh,
Yes.
I don't care
Good point.
that if you're from, Asia, Africa, Europe. No, it's like we're all together, because this has been happening all over the world.
Yeah.
So we need to have more empathy and like look at people who, as you said, people who have lost their jobs, people who cannot work
Yeah.
because there's a lockdown happening right now in Portugal, in the UK. So it is. I think one of the biggest lessons is like to actually see others, even though we cannot physically see others.
That's
right
true.
now.
Interesting, because you're right. We are all connected. So, and I think we seem to forget that. I think we have to start acting like we are actually connected. And again, Adu, lockdown, being in isolation is not, total isolation is not the answer. We have to find ways to actively engage with other people. And I think technology. Can you imagine if we had no technology during the pandemic? What would this be like? This kind of isolation where you have absolutely no social media, you have no contact with anyone. If this had happened in the beginning of the 80s, where we only had phones, I don't think we would have survived.
I don't know. I really don't know, because and we only had phones, and it was not cheap to call someone, even
That's right.
and domestically, like
let alone international.
Yeah, so no, like that would be insane.
Yeah. So I think that's it. That's a good point, dude. It's like we're all connected. Yeah, we have to like remember that.
And to end on a positive note, like I mean, some people are not very positive about next year, but the 2020 is almost over. What are your hopes and expectations for 2021?
I was hoping and I was expecting that you were not going to ask me this question. It's a tough one, because I have been asking myself the same question. And to be quite honest with you, man, I don't really have an answer for this. I don't feel like. I think that the only expectation that I have for myself, my only hope for 2021, is that I'm going to be ready for whatever may come. I think it's important for us to plan for the future, but also recognize the amount of uncertainty that we're facing every day. And no matter how much, as you said your plan, your hope for 2020 was to spend 2 weeks in Brazil and then travel and then move away. But you can plan for the future, but you didn't know that the COVID, the coronavirus would strike us. And I think we have to also understand that we need to learn to embrace fate. And I think that even in times like this, even in times of tragedy, we have to remain mindful. We have to remain optimistic, as you said, and try to plan, but planning thinking, okay, I want to do this, but there's a very good chance that this might not happen because we might still have the coronavirus in the spring. We might still have coronavirus next year. What if the vaccine doesn't work? I think we have to be prepared for that. So whatever hope or expectation you have for 2021, mine is to grow my business. But at the same time, I know that I have to practice preparing or planning for 2021, but knowing that there might be adversities, there might be obstacles. And I think, Edu, just to end this on a positive note, I think we have to be reminded that every adversity, in this case, the coronavirus in our case, is an opportunity for us to practice our virtues, for us to practice temperance, for us to practice wisdom, for us to practice courage, for us to reconnect. For you, it has been an opportunity to reconnect with your mother, to reconnect with your family, to spend time with your newborn nephew. Yeah. So I think that's it. Like, there's always a positive and a negative, but if we're always looking for the negative in a situation, then let fate help you, because I won't.
Mainstream media does that really well already. We don't need to, right? We don't need to be watching that and thinking about that.
Let's make this a positive podcast.
Yes, definitely positive. I'm also hoping for the best, for a vaccine, for a cure, and that, but I think we're all now ready, as you said. I mean, we should be ready to know that we cannot control anything. I mean, we should plan, we should make plans, but be ready to sometimes just change all of that. Like it has happened to us and to so many people. Leo, thank you very much. Thank you very much. It was a pleasure to have you here.
Thank you, man. Thanks a lot. Thanks for having me.